Alright, let's continue. Next, let's take a look. First, let's talk about what safety is. Of course, before we talk about safety, I definitely need to tell everyone that there is no absolute safety. To be honest, absolute safety does not exist. So, what does it mean exactly? If you insist, what is absolute safety, then I can only say it's where there's no network, right? Since we're discussing cybersecurity, right? If there's no network here, then it's safe, right? You agree, don't you? Right? How can you ensure your travel safety if you don't travel? That would be absolute safety. Similarly, let's be honest, achieving absolute safety is impossible. So here we are talking about this safety thing. How should I put it? It involves a lot of factors. Of course, the most important point is what we need to ensure. Ensuring availability, that is security, and that availability. You see? You say this thing, like for instance, you say that like you're afraid your card might get skimmed, right? After all, like there's a security code on the back of the credit card, right? You're afraid someone will pick it up, someone gets your card and then knows your security code and goes online to commit fraud. Then you give him a safe locked inside another that, to be honest, that thing, in that case, when you really want to use it yourself, you'd have to open it layer by layer, honestly. To be honest, isn't the availability very low then? Of course, the availability is very low. Similarly, when we consider security, we must also consider availability. So, looking at it this way, it's very difficult to achieve absolute security. It's basically impossible to achieve absolute security. So here, let's take a look. How should we ensure our security? Here we have a basic concept of security and common security threats. Because our concept of security is definitely related to security threats. Why is that? Because, right? In places where there are no threats, right? You don't need to deal with these things, right? If there's no thief, there's no need for a police chase. Here, let's take a look at what threats exist. The first one is what I just mentioned. Do you want convenience or security? Convenience refers to availability, right? And security refers to security. The guiding principle in building networks is that we want the convenience to record and read digital information, our network, right? Our network is for transmitting data. The guiding principle in building our network is how we can conveniently read and record this information, how we can conveniently transmit this information. That is the guiding principle in building our network. Of course, the more convenient, the better, right? And as for security, on the flip side, we need to protect and restrict access to these pieces of information. And here there is a concept called blocking unauthorized access. That is our network, right? Users accessing resources, our network, right? Basically, when we build networks, it's definitely this factor, right? Use one is users, another is resources. We need to let the right users access the right resources. It's not about any user being able to access any resource. This is about when we deploy security. It means we just need to deploy security, which definitely is a stumbling block for some people. Definitely, it's about intentionally needing to restrict, imposing some restrictions. What we need to do here is to we use a model called a differentiated service model. We need to implement differentiated services for what kind of users are allowed to access what kind of resources, what kind of users, right? They are not allowed to access certain resources. These things are differentiated services. That is to say, in this world of security, these users are ranked in different levels. Different users, they have different permissions. They can access different resources. Only then can we ensure the security of our data. So, when you construct network philosophies, how do you facilitate reading and storing, reading and recording? And the philosophy of security is about how you impose restrictions. So there's a saying, right? You learn when you study routing and switching, when you do experiments, after you finish, after it works, you're happy. But if you're experimenting with security and it doesn't work afterwards, you're also happy, because in this case, you've ensured that it's secure. You're very happy. Here, it's about not letting all users be able to access all resources. We definitely need to protect certain resources or limit certain users. So, security and convenience are somewhat contradictory. So it's about whether you want convenience or security. These two things are somewhat at odds. After all, do you want convenience or security? There's a contradiction between the two. You want convenience or security? So if you say you want convenience, then if you want convenience, right? You don't set any security measures. Then of course it's most convenient, like your home. In your home, if there's no door, only a door frame, no door, then entering and exiting your home is of course the most convenient. But the risk is also the greatest, right? Then anyone can walk into your house, right? Anyone can just come in, they can all enter. In such a case, the risk is obviously too great. But you say about your home, your house, if you make your door like a bank vault, requiring that kind of door, that door, it's really thick, right? On both sides, it takes two people to open it at the same time to actually get it open. In such a case, right? You say, for example, say both spouses need to be there, right? Then they can one on each side. Only then can they open the door. In such a case, honestly speaking, it's not convenient at all. But although it's secure, it's inconvenient. So in this case, if you don't set up any security measures, it's very convenient, but the risk is too high. But if you set up many security measures, then in that case you significantly reduce convenience. You might even hinder normal use. You see, you set up various security facilities, various stumbling blocks, and then you'll find, hey, this thing, how do you use it? It becomes unusable. Just like, for instance, let me give you an example. You say you need to use, you say you need that. You say you need to, on your own computer, open a certain file. You start the computer, set a BIOS password, enter the BIOS password, then enter the system. Set another password for the system. After entering the system password, on your hard drive, say the BitLocker on your hard drive, then another password. After entering all those passwords, when you open the document asks for another password. You enter it, and after entering 4 passwords, finally you open the file. Then you discover you need another password to print. So then you realize that even printing requires a password. Do you think this setup is convenient? Honestly, right? It's really inconvenient. Although, sure, it's secure, it is quite secure, but it affects normal use, doesn't it? A bit. Normal, right? You set a BIOS password, right? Then you set this system password. Typically, right? Your BIOS password is just to prevent people from entering your BIOS to change settings, right? When you start the system. Basically, you're just preventing someone from using a USB drive, right? To boot from a PE and directly enter your system. In this case, to put it simply, we definitely need to consider how to balance convenience and how to ensure security. How to do it conveniently and securely. You can't say that for the sake of security, you impair normal usage. Nor can you say you won't implement security measures just for the sake of convenience. This thing, honestly, is a bit like mysticism. This mysticism I'm talking about is in the workplace. It's a bit mystical, like for example, previously there was a big uproar about a ransomware. You know, right? Many places were affected. At that time, one of the trainees, he told me, he said just before the ransomware outbreak, he had read an article online and he opened a few ports on his system. Then, after the ransomware outbreak in their entire building, only their company wasn't affected. Then, he got promoted and received a raise. Do you think this is mystical? It really is mystical. But here, the key point is, that is, with these kinds of security events or some security breaches, They don't always lead to dire consequences. They often don't attract enough attention. Like, for example, on the street, riding electric scooters. Do you think everyone wears a helmet? Right? Certainly not everyone wears a helmet. But you say, right? Does not wearing a helmet on an electric scooter always result in an accident? Not necessarily. But if you do have an accident, right, then it's quite likely to result in dire consequences. So in such cases, sometimes these types of situations are referred to as what? They're called a lack of security awareness. When there's a lack of security awareness, it doesn't always lead to dire consequences. But it indeed can truly, if it does happen, lead to such dire consequences just once, can cause severe losses. So, in these security incidents, it's somewhat mystical when they will happen. You never know, but if it does, it leads to weakened defenses. People think it won't happen to them. Why should I worry? Who's going to target me? It won't happen. But then it doesn't exist, right? It doesn't. But then it does happen, and when it does, it's 100%. So therefore, right, we need to deploy this system, we need to monitor and prevent what we talked about here. Unauthorized network access. We mentioned this before. Blocking unauthorized access. How do you block it? You need to detect it. You need to know, right? You need to recognize it. Recognize who the user is. Recognize them. Who is this user, right? Then, what resources can this user access? Or what resources they cannot access. So here, it involves the network elements you access. One is the network elements you access, and also it involves the devices connected to the network. These things, basically, are mainly your user devices and resources. Mainly these things. We need to detect and block both internal and external unauthorized network traffic. Why do we say internal and external? Because these attacks we encounter can come from both inside and outside the company. These attacks that we encounter, we encounter these attacks that could potentially originate from within the company or from external sources. This means it's possible, so we must have ways to detect and monitor, right? And then block such traffic to ensure our data security. So we need to find a balance between security measures and our construction goals. We want to protect user data. Focusing on confidentiality means only authorized users can access the data. It's not accessible to just anyone, not every Tom, Dick, or Harry. After all, a lot of this data contains business secrets. It belongs to certain business sectors. Even state secrets, these things. We need to ensure their confidentiality. Besides that, apart from confidentiality, right, we also need to ensure integrity. This thing about confidentiality, you say I have data, my data, I simply say I protect its confidentiality, but integrity doesn't matter. Do you think there are people like that? Although they can't understand it, it doesn't matter. But they can't stop me from tampering. Right? You won't let me see, I won't let you see. Right? I can't decrypt it, it doesn't matter. I'll make sure you can't decrypt it either. In such a case, isn't your data essentially damaged? We need to ensure that the data is not damaged or altered. This is integrity. We need to ensure our data's confidentiality, integrity, and also availability. At least, right? Others might not understand, but you yourself should be able to understand. That is, ordinary people shouldn't understand, but authorized personnel should be able to understand. Right, ordinary people shouldn't access it, but authorized people should be able to access it. So, in this regard, confidentiality, integrity, and also availability. Availability, honestly, availability is the most important. Otherwise, you tell me, if I have no data, isn't that the safest? So, here, at this point, we need to ensure confidentiality, integrity, availability. So here, of course, know the enemy and know yourself, and you can fight 100 battles without disaster. What does this mean? It means that we go to study security, we do security. It's always a struggle with people. It's a struggle with people. So in this case, your opponent is human. In this case, we need to know the enemy and ourselves to never be defeated. You need to know, right? You need to know what the other side has. It's like when you're in opposition, you need to know what skills the other side has. You don't even know what skills they have, right? Just foolishly charging forward in that case, honestly, right? Isn't that a bit rash? We can't be such reckless people. In that case, we need to know what security threats exist so we can deploy countermeasures. There's a saying, it goes like this: you have to defend. That is, you need to defend. That is, you need to first fortify yourself. That is, you need to think from another perspective. Think about it. If you were an attacker, if you were the bad guy, how would you go about causing trouble? You need to think about it, right? If you were to do this, go cause trouble, how would you do it? In this way, you can develop targeted defenses. That's good. Next, let's take a look here. Just now, we mentioned both internal and external threats, but actually, internal and external threats are not the same. Why? Because these external security threats, the attackers, usually don't need to access your internal network. They, for instance, connect directly through the internet, right? Directly come in. In such cases, it's commonly referred to as being hacked in. In such cases, the characteristic is that the attacker, right, doesn't need to be inside your network. They can from outside, right, directly attack your network, directly attack your system. Such attacks that come from outside often need to master some more technical means achieved through technical prowess. For example, right, there is a very popular branch in security called penetration testing. Those guys who do penetration testing, right, they love to do various scans, right, to scan for vulnerabilities, find vulnerabilities, and then go about executing attacks. Such cases are often technically driven, but however, it used to be difficult, but nowadays, it's becoming increasingly simple. In the past, when our computers and networks were just beginning, if you said you were a hacker and you could hack someone else's system, someone else's network, it meant something. It meant you were very skilled. That thing, why back then, right, on the tools front, honestly, it was all about not having so many techniques. It was all about inner strength. Now, it's different. Everyone has already put the toolbox right in front of you, right? Like when you download something like Tele, a complete toolbox is right there in front of you. You want to do something, right? Anyone with a bit of knowledge can be a script kiddie. In this case, these kinds of technical attack methods used to be very difficult. Now, they are very simple, but from a defensive perspective, the pressure is greater than before. Why? Because previously, to be honest, enterprise networks didn't really need security. I could say they basically didn't need it. Why? Because, taking our country as an example, in the early years it was all about labor-intensive models. In those early years it was all about labor-intensive models, like in a factory. It was all about relying on just labor models. Relying on what features, just relying on features to do that, saying that it was not much different from manual labor. This type of labor-intensive model. There were only a few computers in total. The entire company only had a few computers, and those few were just for accessing the internet. Maybe one was in the boss's office for checking news or stocks. Honestly speaking, you say if it gets hacked, it's no big deal, right? There's a saying, right? Reboot solves 90% of the problems. Reinstall solves 99% of the problems. Starting over solves 100% of the problems. You say, just reinstall the system and basically it's resolved. That was how it used to be, right? Then, like say 20 years ago, if you had to choose between your computer data being wiped and your computer breaking, which would you choose? 20 years ago, I would say, I'd choose for my computer not to break, right? I'd just say, Reinstalling the hard drive is no big deal. There was nothing important on it. But now I ask you, if all the data on your hard drive was wiped, or say your computer broke, which would you choose? I think basically it's a given. Still, the computer can break, right? The data must not be lost. So now, right, these attacks are getting simpler, the requirements for attackers are getting lower, and then your data is becoming more and more important. So, what does this cause? Back then, like in the early 2000s, if you had a CCIE in security, jobs were relatively harder to find domestically. Why? Because it wasn't really needed. But now, right, you talk about security, it's quite in demand. Because now, right, now data is becoming more and more important due to industrial upgrading, right? Data is becoming increasingly important. So now, the field of security, as data becomes more vital, security becomes more critical. So in this regard, security, of course, it's becoming increasingly important. And attacks are becoming simpler, right? Attackers even have a bunch of software, even tailored and packaged specifically for you, placed in a complete hacker toolkit available directly to you. You download an entire system of tools, a complete toolkit right in front of you. You think about what mischief you want to do. Honestly, you have the tools. Of course, it's not that we should do evil, right? It's just that we need to know that these tools exist, so we need to figure out how to defend against them. Honestly, nowadays, defense is relatively straightforward and brute force. We need to defend, right? So we must have, just as attackers have their weapons, we also have our weapon, our equipment. We can deploy these through specific security devices in the network. We deploy security devices to counteract these dangers, such as deploying firewalls, deploying some intrusion detection systems. These things are usually to counter external threats, like when you encounter hackers, or when you encounter those script kiddies, right? Or some others. Generally, it's about countering what? External threats, like some hackers, or some other kinds of attackers. You encounter hackers, or some script kiddies, right? Or some others. In short, when you encounter attackers, we can counteract through technical means. This is essentially about technical prowess, right? It's like what? It's like playing chess against them, right? This is to see whose chess game is higher. In such cases, the external threats often are the focus of your security defenses. They are relatively easier to get attention for. Just think, I need to secure. Think, the security of this data, right? The first thing you think of is, hey, should I deploy some security mechanisms or install some devices? But this, of course, tends to draw attention easily. Besides external security, there's internal security. Honestly, internal security, people are always the weakest link in security. Why? Because, generally speaking, internal security is about things like insiders, employees who are disgruntled with the company. Those individuals, those internal personnel, they have already accessed the internal network, right? They are very familiar with your internal network structure, or even they know your IT architecture inside and out. Your passwords, they know them. In such cases, honestly, they don't need any technical means to carry out, say, data theft. They want to steal some data, it's easy, right? Simple, right? The most brutal way is just to pull out the hard drive, right? These kinds of actions, do you say they require any technical skills? Do they need any technical means? Honestly, such actions really don't require any technical skills to be carried out. So it's very hard to defend against them using technical methods, because they are essentially playing dirty tricks on you, right? You say, in the scenarios we discussed earlier, when two people are competing in a match, and then underneath he directly sabotages you, he tampers with your water, right? In such cases, he's playing dirty tricks. In such cases, playing dirty tricks, honestly, we find it very hard to counter with technical methods, right? You say, your chess game, You say even if your chess skills are high, you can't prevent someone from drugging your drink. In this case, it's hard to defend against with technology. Instead, you need some managerial and procedural controls, including physical security measures like access controls, management protocols, and other measures like physical barriers, security cameras, and biometric systems like fingerprint and facial recognition to prevent unauthorized access. These methods use physical security, including ID cards and other such measures to ensure safety. So, the difference between external and internal threats is significant. Thus, our network security, including physical security, is crucial, and we must protect our systems through technical and physical means. Physical security, honestly, means locking server cabinets and securing server rooms, which are essential but not our main concern here. Here, our focus is on deploying technical solutions to defend against technical attacks. Okay, with that said, let's discuss some basic concepts of security.